Changing tack, the Senate is due to wrap up debate and then pass the repeal of a law that's blocked the two territories from ever legislating for voluntary assisted dying. That'll end a quarter-of-a-century ban in the ACT and in the Northern Territory. In those 25 years, most states have gone ahead and passed laws that they were allowed to do for assisted dying for terminally ill people. Once it's done here in the federal parliament, this will mark a point of completion for many who've waited or worked patiently towards this day, some of whom are gathered here at Parliament House today. ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr is among them. He's confirmed if the legislation passes tonight, a bill to legalise voluntary assisted dying in the ACT will be introduced in the second half of next year.
We will have a thorough and engaged process. Will be a conscience vote, I understand, across the ACT Assembly. Certainly will be for ACT Labor members. I think it will bring out the best in the ACT Parliament, and I would hope that if not this time next year, then early in 2024, our democratic processes will have resolved this issue and we would have the best and most effective voluntary assisted dying laws in the country, taking into account the experiences of the 6 Australian states that have legislated and putting in place a process that reflects the values of our community. And I want to acknowledge the voices of Canberrans and indeed the voices of Northern Territorians being heard finally after such a long period of time. But this journey predates it, my time in politics, and I want to pay tribute to those who have been campaigning for 25 years and particularly acknowledge former Northern Territory Chief Minister Marshall Perrin and thank him for being here today. It's often been said, and I think Martin Luther King said it first, that the arc of history bends towards justice, and this is yet another example. It's another one we can tick off our list of reforms delivered since the May federal election when people voted for change in this nation.
Yeah, so a bit of a hands across the territories moment there with acknowledgement from the ACT about what also has been felt and experienced in the Northern Territory across these 2.5 decades. Luke Gosling was a co-sponsor of the bill first presented in the House soon after our current 47th Parliament was formed in July. The member for Solomon in the Northern Territory is with us here in the studio. Luke, welcome back. You were in the courtyard there with Andrew Barr and others not so long ago. There is a sense in which history is going to be made for Territorians tonight. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I do, Gregor. It's quite a hopeful atmosphere amongst all the Territorians, whether they're from the ACT or the Northern Territory, that this injustice of 25 years will finally be righted. And it was great to have the former NT Chief Minister, Marshall Perrin, there. It was his government that led and legislated. No one else had at that period around our country. So 25 years later, the territories haven't been able to legislate, but all the states have. So I think we are in a better position now, and it's about time that we stop being considered second-class citizens, and I hope all the senators agree tonight.
A couple of things are going to happen in the Senate before we get to that moment. I think some include amendments that are going to be moved. Controversially, I think. What do you understand to be the intention of some of those? I use the word controversial because it's been described to me that one of them would seek to ban from the two territories the medications commonly used for voluntary assisted dying. Is there any prospect that they would get up?
Oh, I don't believe so, because I think the senators are smart enough to see that this is a more simple proposition, and that is that Territorians should have the same rights as anyone else in our Commonwealth. So yeah, I'm disappointed that it's been used as an opportunity to try and sort of repeal the attempts to repeal. And it's a pretty simple message to the senators. If they want to have a say on voluntary assisted dying legislation for the Northern Territory or in the ACT will then resign from this Commonwealth Federal Parliament and go and run in one of those jurisdictions and argue there, because that is not the proposition that is before you tonight.
Yeah, I think there's some legal argument over whether you can amend what is effectively the repeal of a law. But anyway, let's not go there. We did hear from Andrew Barr outlining his own expectations for the ACT Assembly if things go as planned tonight. That is legislation for voluntary assisted dying later next year. What do you understand to be the plans of Natasha Fyles and the Northern Territory government?
Yeah, the NT, I won't speak for the MT Chief Minister one, but they've got a pretty full agenda. I'd be very surprised if they leapt straight into this. There'll be a lot of consultation required, and Natasha Fyles would be well aware of that. We've got, we're a different territory to this one. It's a massive place with a lot of vulnerable people, so there'll need to be significant consultation. If they decide to legislate, well then that'll be after that consultation.
Yeah, let me tease you out on that, because we talk of the territories coupling them together, but they couldn't be more different, could they, when it comes to the demographics and the land mass. So what extra checks and balances will need to be thought through once it is possible to legislate in this area in your own territory?
Well, I think we've got the benefit. I mean, we're not the biggest landmass for a jurisdiction. Obviously, WA is bigger than the Northern Territory, but this has the same issues with remote communities, and that's the benefit for us as territories, and the Northern Territory in particular, is that unlike when Marshall Perrin was doing it for the first time in Australia, we'll be able to look at WA and Queensland, other big jurisdictions with similar challenges, and we'll be able to learn from world's best practice and come up with legislation for the Parliament and for the people of the Northern Territory to have a say in during that consultation process.
All right, and how do you look back on the conscience debate as it played out here in the federal Parliament, both in your chamber, the House, and in the Senate? It's often said that it brings out the best in parliamentarians because they are forced to think deeply on what are moral issues, really, as well as legal ones. What surprised you about the course of debate in this place?
I think there's been a shift, and I was very forthright with our colleagues in the Federal Labor Caucus. I actually argued that this shouldn't be a conscience vote, because that is not the proposition. It shouldn't be a conscience vote where the Territorians are treated the same and have the equal democratic rights as people in the states. That was my view. I wasn't successful. But I think during the debate, colleagues saw that it was wrong, that 25 years after having our rights trampled, it was time. And that's why we had such a resounding answer to the question in the reps, and I believe we'll have it as well in the Senate tonight.
You actually saw some examples, didn't you? I won't name names, but they are on the record, of people who stated that their views had changed fundamentally in recent years, and if they'd been asked to do this a couple of years ago, they might have voted in a different way. That's quite a powerful admission on the floor of either the Senate or the House.
Yeah, I think in a number of ways. I've seen colleagues change in that they understand our proposition, that it's about democratic equality in Australia. But I saw people change their views on voluntary assisted dying as well, given that it's up and running in the majority of our country. And I'm on the record, I have reservations about voluntary assisted dying. I'll be making sure that there's checks there and that there's a proper consultation in the Northern Territory where I have responsibility. But it is right that we have a say, and it's time the Territorians had a say.
Well, no matter whether people arrive at that position on a territory rights front or on a moral and voluntary assisted dying calculation, it looks like people are going to arrive at the same position in majority in the Senate pretty quickly.
That's right.
Luke Gosling, really appreciate your thoughts on all of this, and if we don't get to talk before the year's out, thanks for everything this year.
Good on you, Greg.